Pet Behaviour Odysseys, Episode 2, Seeking Help.
Hello and welcome to Pet Behaviour Odysseys. My name is Daniel Mills and I'm Professor of Veterinary Behavioural Medicine at the University of Lincoln, where together with some amazing colleagues we run the Animal Behaviour Clinic at the University of Lincoln, which is a veterinary behavioural service for people with pets and problem behaviour. Pet Behaviour Odysseys is a podcast series exploring the experience of having a problem pet, focusing especially on the client's experience. I'm joined each week by my colleague at the clinic and co-presenter, Millie Jones. Hi, Millie.
Hello.
Together with a family who have been on the Pet Behaviour Odyssey. I'll introduce you to them all very soon. The current 8-part series is dedicated to the journey associated with an adorable little Daxie called Drax and his family, Becky and Craig, and their young daughter. Drax came to us with a combination of both separation-related problems and reactivity to both dogs and other people, having been seen by several others for help. Each week we examine a different aspect of Drax's family's journey, and we hope the series will reassure and inspire anyone who might be challenged by their pet's behaviour. We also hope it will be of interest to those working in this field, as I know it can sometimes appear to be a lonely and at times stressful profession. Whatever your situation, I hope you appreciate that you are not alone. So without further delay, let me introduce you to Becky. Evening, Becky.
Hello again.
And Craig. Hi, Craig.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you once again for joining us and making this series possible. In the previous episode, we explored your experience of welcoming a dog into your life, why you got Drax, your hopes and aspirations, and then the realization that things were not quite as you hoped. I think that's possibly an understatement. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how you went about seeking help and your experience of trying to navigate the world of professional animal behaviour services. So I'm going to hand over to Millie now, and I'll be dropping in and out of the conversation as we go through.
Perfect, thank you. So we did touch on it in the first episode, but for the benefit of listeners, can we start just with Becky to recap where you first sought help? So where you first kind of started looking for maybe some answers and how that came about?
Yeah, of course. So the first professional we spoke to was our trainer at the puppy classes that we used to take Drax to. So he started being quite reactive to other dogs. And during one of the classes, he had an altercation with one of the dogs in the class. And we sort of withdrew him from those just because it was too stressful for him to be in there. So we kept in touch with the trainer on a one-to-one basis, and she did home visits. And we explained all the other problems we were having with Drax, mainly around not being able to be left alone. So she said it was separation anxiety that he had. I'd never heard of it before. But she gave us some strategies around helping to keep him calm and trying to sort of leave him for periods of time in the house. That was quite short-lived, wasn't it? That, do you remember the trainer from the class? Yeah, we didn't see her too much because it wasn't really doing much, to be honest.
Yeah, and at that point, so kind of very first point of starting to explore some of these issues, how did you, or what was your understanding of sort of the reasons behind why Drax was behaving in that way? You say separation anxiety there and sort of that behaviour towards other dogs, but did you feel kind of you had an understanding of why it was happening?
I assumed the reactivity was because he'd been attacked in the park by another dog that was off leash, so it sort of stemmed from there. And in terms of the separation anxiety, I can't actually remember why it was all that started.
I think it was a case of, from our description of how he was, it was just the label.
It was just sort of labeled.
No real, this is what separation anxiety is, this is, how it affects, Drax, this is what you need to do and why you need to do it. It was just easy to say that's separation anxiety, and we were like, oh, he's got separation anxiety.
That explains it. And then that sort of sent me on a path of Googling separation anxiety and looking for more specialists in the area, and came across Facebook and just looking at people's pages and sort of own organisations, I suppose, and there were loads to choose from, but I sort of went through Facebook to get quite like in some groups. There's a lot I just like joined a lot of groups around dogs with separation anxiety, and then just got some recommendations from all that, and then came across the next trainer we moved on to, who had a Dachshund, and she said she was quite a specialist in Dachshund behaviour as well. So
I think that's quite common, that people often do gravitate towards breed specialists as well.
Yeah.
We see that quite a lot, that, the sort of the breed identity is quite a strong draw. I think one of the big challenges with the field is that there is no regulation in the field. And so it's very difficult to work out who knows what and who knows anything. As I always point out, if people can hear something that sounds like a Victorian machine in the background, that's actually Drax chewing on a bone, I think. So,
it's keeping him calm. That's his calm.
Keep him quiet while we have the chat. But yeah, so I mean, was that your experience then, going with sort of somebody who knew Dachshunds? Was that a big draw to you?
Yeah, it was. And what I didn't realise as well until after I started searching was there was quite a lot of people who had problems with Dachshunds. It was quite a commonality. Just alongside all this as well, we were actually trying to get support and treatment for his physical health problems. So alongside all the behaviour, we were looking at he was suffering quite a lot of reflux and being sick. And whenever he'd have an episode of that, it just heightened all his behaviour issues. So his reactivity was 100 times charged. Couldn't leave him in another room without him getting upset, because he was clearly in a lot of pain and we had no idea why. Well, actually, I do know why now. It was because I started him on a raw-fed diet and his stomach just couldn't take raw. So it was sort of, we were battling against the two all the time. So until we got the physical problems addressed, his behaviour never really settled down. So it was sort of, we were just in a catch-22 all the time. We were working with the vet for his physical stuff and then working with a behaviourist around his behaviour concerns, which they couldn't separate if it was because of his stomach problems or something underlying. So, yes, it's quite complex.
So can I just ask at that point, one of the, you mentioned a behaviourist, then you mentioned a trainer at the beginning. What did you see as the difference between those? Did you know there was a difference between them, or?
Well, to be honest, the next person I went to, I thought she was a behaviourist, but she wasn't. And I found that out because the groups that I'd been in, they were all saying that their dogs were on medication for separation anxiety, and you can't do any form of training until they're on sort of medication like sertraline, fluoxetine. And when I spoke to her about that, she said she wouldn't be able to recommend my vet to prescribe me any because she wasn't a registered behaviourist. So I wasn't aware of that at the start. I wasn't aware that you needed a behaviourist to prescribe medication.
I'll jump in at this point because actually only a vet can recommend medication. If you're a non-vet, even working in this field, legally you're not supposed to discuss it directly with clients. You can say, I think your pet may benefit from some medication, but the responsibility in the UK always rests with the vet. And this can be a sort of challenge because a lot of vets don't really know anything about behaviour. And so you've got this tension between people who may have done a lot of studying and understand about the drugs, but they're not qualified vets, so they don't understand necessarily, all the interactions that drugs can have with their normal physiology, etc. So it's really important, I think, that anyone listening to this, if you do have a pet with problem behaviour and you think medications may be useful, you need to find either a veterinary behaviourist or a behaviourist who's going to work very closely with a vet, and a vet who will take that on board as well, in order to make sure that you don't end up having something prescribed that could kill your pet.
Well, exactly. And our vets, they wouldn't touch it. They wouldn't prescribe anything. We actually moved vets, didn't we, at one point, to go to another vet who they ended up helping us. But I then had to find an actual registered behaviourist. I don't know what the technical term is
Well, we'll come to that
yeah.
later on, because it is. I mean, it's a real minefield. There's lots of qualifications that people can have, and they can call themselves a registered behaviourist, but registered with what? It's not a regulated profession, so they can be registered. They could be registered with Uncle Bill round the corner and call themselves a registered behaviourist. And it's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, the whole process was a nightmare. So
when did you sort of start to feel that challenge in finding the right help then? So you kind of going from trainer to thinking you were seeing a behaviourist, but then realizing maybe not of the kind of qualification that you thought. How were you feeling throughout that kind of process?
it was just really frustrating because it was just like I was on a pyramid scheme. I literally had to start from the bottom of puppy classes and then work my way up to the people who could actually help. And it was wasting so much time and money, because we put a lot of time into training him, didn't we? But he's the most trained dog ever, intellectually, but it just wasn't touching the behaviour stuff. It wasn't making a dent, or it did, and then it just set us back. And it was just my well-being were just shot, essentially.
And we were getting a lot of help and advice and support from people who hadn't actually met or seen Drax.
Yeah.
So it was a case of we would have videos to send to say this is what he's like, but that would be a snapshot at that particular time, and then it was, some of the people that we were working with, that it was like they'd decided that this is what you need to do in order to get him to be able to be left alone. And I mean, he went through a phase of he doesn't like the cold, he doesn't like the wet, so not going out in the garden. And I mean, I might be slightly going off topic, but it was a case of he will do this if you keep doing this.
And we're like, won't
And he only knows. And there was almost like a standoff once where he nearly went 24 hours
without going to the toilet.
And then this person was like, I'm shocked. And I'm like, we're not, because we live with him every day.
Yeah.
So it was all done purely on videos, and obviously, met him, and
it was very much
cities that come with him.
It was a one size fits all tailored approach.
Yeah. And it sounds, I mean, what is coming out from what you're both saying is you didn't feel particularly heard kind of in terms of your individual circumstances at that stage.
Yeah. It was like, oh, well, this is like the best program and it's got all these authors who swear by it. There's a book, I've read the book, not worked at all. Whole groups about it. And the thing with support groups is if you try and write something to sort of contradict what they're trying to sell, they just don't put your post on the message board. So all the posts are all positive and, oh yeah, this is amazing, this works, when actually you don't see the people who are generally trying to ask what people's struggles are to get you through it, because they filter everything out so it looks amazing, but it doesn't work for everyone.
I think there's another really important point there, just for people to be aware of, is, again, a lot of people will offer this very generic advice saying, oh, your dog has got this condition, this is how you treat it. And as we'll talk about in a later episode, every client that comes to us is an individual and their experience is unique and the issues they're facing are unique. And you have to individualize things if you really want to make success, because, as I said, you've got your own lived experience, and just using these sort of generic prescriptions is not the way forward in our experience. And it's not surprising then that people just do a weekend course and then call themselves a behaviourist, because they've just got a long list of handouts that they can give out, and that's not the way.
With these early experiences, because obviously we're talking about a range of issues, not necessarily just the separation side of things with Drax, were there strategies that you were given that you did feel were helpful or worked? And if so, sort of what were they and what maybe wasn't so helpful at the time?
I think the support I got for the reactivity from the people I worked with was more helpful than the separation anxiety. And the training that I took on myself through various platforms and the skills I'd learned myself, that was the most useful. It was just leaving him alone, wasn't it? It wasn't working. And every time, I think at one point we got to about 20 minutes of leaving him alone, which was massive at that time, but then it very, very quickly regressed and we could get past 20 seconds and it just knocks you for sick because the amount of time it takes to get to that stage.
So just for the benefits of the listeners, because obviously we know what Drax does when he's left alone, could you just go through what would happen when you try to leave, both, even if you just tried to leave Drax, and then what happened when you actually left, just so the listeners know?
Do you want to?
So, I mean, he could sense when we were about to go, before we were even about to go. It's almost like he could read the tension that me and Becky were probably exerting without even being consciously aware that we were doing it, because we knew what was coming. But it'd be a case of even putting a shoe on, he would be going over and sitting at the front door, and he'd be kind of blocking the front door. And he would do we call it a granny cry. He would almost kind of,
like when you
like a wheeze, like
when you're gasping for air, and you're like,
it was like a whine stroke,
like a panic
howl stroke. So we call it a granny cry, and it was like a really high pitched kind of wheeze, and you could see him literally shaking.
Yeah, it was awful to see. It was, yeah.
And then it got to the point where we'd get his shoes on, we'd have the keys, we'd almost kind of, from the training that we'd had, it would be put your shoes on, sit back down, desensitize it, then get back up. But he's a clever dog, and he knew exactly what we're doing every time. And it got to the point where, I mean, there are occasions where we still do it now, where one person leaves, one person stays to try and take the edge off, and then the next person leaves. But again, he knows that that's happening, so it's almost like you're doing it twice to him.
Yeah, and it was ridiculous. We were sat in the house in coats, hats, shoes for ages before we actually went out to try and desensitize him, just to get him, like, not get rid of the cues to leave him. But it weren't daft at all. He knew what was real and what wasn't.
And as soon as you left and turned the key, before we'd even get a foot away from the door,
barking, crying, scratching at the door,
scratching to the
come home and there'd be poo everywhere. I mean, to be fair, that has only happened a few times because from the moment someone said he's got separation anxiety, we didn't leave him. So from 2019, the end of, till this year, we've not been able to leave him in the house by himself. We stayed, so that was like the most extreme, where we'd got him like, we can't do that to him. It's not fair.
We came back one time and he'd scratched at the wooden or laminate.
It was scratching the door to get out of the door to us, and all his nails had bled. It pooed everywhere,
bleeding.
It was just in an absolute state of, like, he's going to end up dying of a heart attack or something. So we made a conscious decision not to leave him at all. But it was like we were then prisoners in our own home for like best part 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's not an untypical story that we hear. That, you know, this sort of experience and the severity of the signs. I'm not belittling the issues that you have, but, you know, just for the benefit of listeners, just to realise, you know, just how severe and, as I say, how all encompassing the experience can be. That you put your whole life on hold because you can't leave the house, as you say. You're a captive of your own situation. So, I mean, just out of interest, I mean, how much sort of time were you spending trying to resolve the problem, would you say, and how much effort were you investing at this time?
Every single day. And I mean, during COVID, obviously I was working from home, so I was doing it as soon as I get up, in my break, lunchtime, just doing these steps over and over again, in between just training in general and walking.
We almost had a plan written out.
There was I used to fill in diaries constantly every day, so that was time consuming.
Like walk to the door 5 times,
walk back,
walk out for a second.
I don't know, trying to crate training, calm training. It honestly, it took over my whole life.
Did you feel there was much structure to what you were being asked to do? Was it just, so we'll try this and then
It was too structured. It was far too regimented and structured, and I think that's what I struggled with the most, that I had to invest every single day in this, and if I didn't, I was failing. That was my own sort of pressure on myself. I know we're going to talk about when I come to you, but I think that's why it worked so well, because I didn't have that pressure. And if it wasn't regimented like that, because that didn't work for us. But like all the 3 of the behaviours that I went through, that's the same process we had to do.
Yeah, because we even had to work out around my shift of when we were going to do training together. When it was going to be my day, when it was going to be Becky's day, when we were both going to do it together.
And then my daughter was born, so we had to introduce her into this as well. That was like
holding a baby and walking to a door with a baby.
And then we took a year off. I'm like, mentally, I cannot do this anymore.
Yeah, so I suppose overall, the next question we were going to explore was, did you feel your stress around having Drax was getting better or worse during this time?
Considerably worse. And then I had the time of, we got to have a baby soon, because I was doing this all while I was pregnant, right up until pregnant, and I wanted it fixed before the baby was here, because I knew it when as soon as the baby's here, that's it, I cannot invest any time in this. And obviously it didn't get sorted at all. It regressed significantly. So we just took a break from it, didn't we?
And it was awful, because as stressful as it wasn't, we were probably aiming our stress more against one another rather than Drax, because it's not his fault. But there were times where, we would butt heads about, have you done the training? How did he do? Were you being honest when we were doing like the evaluation scores? Because we had to score his.
You didn't record it properly, and honestly,
you didn't write the right time down, and the stresses and it was almost like the micromanagement of doing these routines that we ended up getting stressed.
So did you feel then that the advice you were giving was actually making you feel more guilty about things? Yeah.
Yeah, because at no point did anyone, and quite rightly so, no point did any trainer ever say, Drax is a bad dog, it's Drax's fault,
So
we then, if no one's saying Drax is the issue, then
clearly always.
So would you say nobody ever kind of to that point had said it's not your fault either?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, I think it was they probably implied, but reading between the lines when you're in a heightened state of stress, we probably blamed ourselves.
I don't think the trainers inadvertently said, "Oh, it's your fault." It was more that this is very common. Not sure why it happens. Dachshunds are quite renowned for it. Again, I worked with a behaviourist who all her clients were dachshunds. So it made me think, oh, she's an expert in this. She's done all these amazing case studies and they solved all these dachshund problems. So I think, oh, well, clearly the breed is more in heightened, but I generally thought it was something we did as well when we first got him.
And I suppose that circles back to at the beginning of this episode, you were saying you were told it was separation anxiety, and that was kind of that. It was, there's not that understanding necessarily of where that's come from. It's just that's what it is, and this is how we treat it.
Yeah. Whereas I need to know the why behind stuff, and if I haven't got a why behind it, I'll just look for other reasons, and that would be, or it's our fault. We failed him. We left him for too long when he was a puppy, so now it is ruined. So yeah.
So I know you mentioned at the beginning about Drax having a bad experience with another dog, and his reactivity to other dogs may well stem from that. But I'm just intrigued. Did anybody actually connect the various issues that he had and say, there may be a single thing underlying all of this? Or were you just told that these were individual these were individual problems and each one needed treatment?
Yeah, it was very separate plans for each one.
Okay. Well, we're gonna revisit that in a later episode. So I'm not gonna say any more now. I'll leave that as a teaser for people to tune into a later episode. I won't even say which one. But it's worth perhaps just saying at this point that is one of the things that I think is important when we assess animals, is that we look for the most elegant explanation. It explains everything that's going on, because animals aren't just reacting to this sort of immediate thing that like just you leaving. They are reacting to that with their brain, and that brain is the sum of all of their experiences. It's the sum of all of their genetics. It's, in Drax's case, it's about being a dog. It's about being a dachshund. It's about his early experiences and everything like that. And that creates certain predispositions. And, when we're assessing cases, that's one of the things we're looking at is pretty much every dog we see has got multiple problems. So what's the common emotions underlying this that can explain everything? And then what do we do about those emotions, which I know is quite a different approach rather than, as you say, you've got a dog. In fact, last week we had a dog with 14 problems in the clinic. And you can't have 14 plans for 14 problems. There aren't enough hours in the day. You've got to work out what it is that's underlying it all, and then look at the underlying emotions. But we'll come back to that in another episode. So just want to sort of go back to this issue of trying to recognize a professional. Do you have any words of advice for anybody out there who is looking for a professional before I sort of say a little bit about my own opinion on this?
Just go straight to Lincoln University.
Well, thank you very much. We didn't pay you to say that.
My only advice: don't waste your time on anyone.
Okay, so I mean, it is a really difficult thing, and I think there's a big debate at the moment between trainers and behaviorists, and what's training and what's behavior. And the way that I look at it is that if you're a trainer, then you are expert in training animals, which means getting animals to do things on certain cues. And where we start to move into the area of behavior is where we're actually thinking not about the animal responding to what I want, but actually I'm thinking about modifying the animal's underlying state, its emotions relating to various things. So I think that's one area. People say, oh, well, what about the sort of how do you manage the situation? Sort of if you're with a trainer and somebody asks you about problem behavior. Well, you can look at certain these generic protocols, but I think the key thing that a responsible trainer should always do is if the animal isn't responding as expected, and by as expected I mean in the predictable way, it's not making as much progress as quickly as I expect, or that there's unusual features, then it needs to be considered a more general issue and the potential for veterinary involvement. When I first started out here, I was a strong advocate for vets getting involved in the field, and I still am. But then, I moved actually to a non-vet school and really valued the non-veterinarians, who are often far better trainers, and much more skilled in that behavior modification side than a lot of the vets there. So it's really important that you have somebody with those sorts of skills. But what, as I said, the non-veterinarian doesn't have is that veterinary training. And I think it's important that the two professions work really closely together. In the clinic now at Lincoln, certainly the cases that I see, and okay, perhaps I get the tougher ones being the professor, but 95% of them have some sort of medical complication. And we need the veterinary profession to start recognizing that if you've got an animal with problem behavior, you need to think, well, could pain be involved? Could pain explain some of these signs? And I know we're going to talk about this in relation to Drax in a later episode again. So vets have a lot of those diagnostic skills, actually, and they should be able to say, well, this doesn't seem right. And then they can work closely with behaviorists. So if you're looking for a behaviorist, I would say you want to ask if they work on veterinary referral or they work in close association with the veterinary profession. And if they don't, I would be quite cautious about that, because you can teach a dog not to show pain, but that doesn't stop it showing pain. And I think that's an important part to appreciate. So, if you can't get access to a veterinary behaviourist, make sure that the person is working in close association with the veterinary profession. And as I said, and everybody's got different skills, and that's the one of the joys of our team. We've got Millie here, who's not a vet, but she's very, very skilled, as you know, in helping clients through the whole of the process. So when it comes to qualifications for the veterinary profession, there are some recognised qualifications. There is the European diploma, but there's only about 10 of us in the UK, if that. In fact, I think there's less than that in the UK. And there is the Advanced Veterinary Practitioner Certificate, which again indicates a vet who has a particular interest in the area. So people can go for those qualifications. When it comes to the non-veterinary behaviourist, it is an absolute minefield. There are various organisations that claim to be independent, and they sort of hold registers and things like this, but some of these are just trade organisations. Personally, I would probably say that the only organisation that I would now recommend is the what's known as CCAB Limited, which is Certification for Clinical Animal Behaviourists. That was originally set up by an academic group to oversee standards, and people who go through that have to go through very rigorous experience and training in order to be entered onto their register. They do have a website, and we'll try and remember to put onto the episode the link to their website so that people can look at the list here. There are good behaviourists elsewhere, but the problem is reliably knowing that they're there. And I think that's a really big problem, as you've experienced, that it becomes, it's like, you can talk to a breeder, and some breeders are brilliant and some are an absolute nightmare. It's very hit and miss in those situations. So, but as I say, when it comes to trainers, then we want trainers who recognize where the boundaries are and don't think, well, I'm good at training, therefore I can do behavior work. It is a different skill set, as we'll explore. But so just before we end, I also want to just say a bit more about the stress of living and caring for a pet with a problem behavior. As you know, at Lincoln, we always assess the stress that owners are under when they come to us. And in your case, we asked you to fill in a formal questionnaire about how you felt at the time. That instrument is actually a thing called the Zarit Burden Interview, that was developed originally to assess the burden of people who are looking after other people. And then it got adapted, hence the modified bit, for pet owners. And we gave you the shortened version to fill in and asked you to complete, and you scored 24 on that scale. I'm not sure if I've ever told you this, but 8 is considered being a carer that is coping well. 9 to 11 indicates mild stress, and over 15 severe stress. You're right at the top end of the scale. And I think, listening to your story as you've told us today, it just shows, part of the stress was actually living with Drax, but I think also the confused messaging you were getting, if anything, some of the advice you were getting, it sounds like it was adding to your stress rather than helping to relieve it.
Yep.
And the scale also taps into different sources of the burden felt by carers. And these are broadly defined as sort of general strain, affect relational discomfort and guilt and uncertainty. Needless to say, in your case, you scored high on all of these, but in particular on the general strain. And that normally reflects conflict between sort of meeting your pet's needs and your other commitments. And I think that's one of the things that's come out chatting to you now is that, you're there, you're having a baby as well, on top of everything else, and completely committed, to Drax. And that being pulled in two directions, which is a really hard place to be, I think, for any client. And it's really important that people working in this field, use these sorts of instruments like this, which you can freely access them in order to understand their clients better. And I think, clearly Drax was seriously disrupting your life. And part of our job is to understand this and help you get back some control and balance into your life, recognizing, and navigating rather than again, one of the things you said, which I think was quite pertinent, was this sort of, well, we had to do everything. And if we slipped on one thing, then we weren't doing it. Well, actually, it should be, you need a quality of life, and we need to strike that balance. It's very easy as a professional in this field to get sucked into the needs of the pet and forget about the inevitable stress of the owners in this situation. And all too often, I fear that professionals may be trying to help animals, and I hear them also getting frustrated about clients who don't seem to be implementing their advice. Well, I think if your advice is unreasonable, it doesn't seem unreasonable that clients aren't going to implement it. So there's a message there, I think, for the wider behavior profession that, don't get frustrated with your clients, because if they're not implementing your advice, we need to reflect back about, well, what's the advice we're giving? Why isn't the client implementing it? And it's not because you don't want to. We know you very well. We know how committed you are. It's just that what was being asked for you at that time, I think, was unrealistic. As committed as you were, you just couldn't meet all of the requirements. So it's important to keep an eye on that human side. Theory is one thing, practice is another. But anyway, we'll talk more about this side of things maybe in future episodes, but I just wanted to flag that now. So I think that actually brings us to the end of this episode. So I must say a big thank you to you both again, both Becky and Craig, not just for your time, but also being so frank about your experiences. I think it's really valuable. Oh, and I can see we've got Drax on the pictures here. Not that other people will be able to see, but it's nice to see him. I'm sure hearing about your experiences and feelings has been enormous help and comfort to many listening who have been or are in a similar situation. And I'm also sure it helps many others appreciate the human side of many of the issues. So I'd also like to thank my co-host Millie for her expert input. And I should say at this point that actually Millie is one of the people who's really fueled my interest in this human side of problem behaviour. I've been in the business for a fair old few years. So I really want to say a sort of public thank you to you too, Millie, because it's something that she's always been a champion for. And I think not just me, but the whole clinic team are a better team for it as well. So thanks a lot for that. And thank you to the people listening out there. I hope you'll join us for the next episode, when next week we will explore Becky and Craig's experience of coming to Lincoln and how we assess individual needs of clients that we've touched on in this episode, help prepare them for the action they need to successfully bring about the change necessary to help both themselves and their pets. So thank you once again and take care.
Thank you. Bye.
I think this has been a really useful discussion. Many people do not realise just how unregulated the field is. And so it's so easy to end up paying a lot of money for a poor service. I don't just mean poor service in terms of being given ineffective advice, although that does occur, but I mean a service that does not respect the client's situation. People use a whole range of letters after their name. I've got to be honest, sometimes I've no idea what they stand for and have to look them up. As a vet, I do work in a regulated field, so there are strict limits on what I can put after my name, but this is not the case when it comes to training and behaviour.
Even when someone has good qualifications, this is not a guarantee of a good service or the right service for you and your pet. Theoretical knowledge is one thing, practical application is another. Rather, we have to balance these with experience and what the individual says. But again, it can be really difficult for owners, as they can easily be taken in by a trainer's or behaviourist's confidence or glossy website. I think the best advice we can offer to owners is to ask yourself what you want and how important protecting your relationship with your pet is to you. If someone suggests something that you're uncomfortable with, then ask about alternatives or go elsewhere. Ask them how they would approach the problem first if you're unsure, i.e. the principles they may use. Then ask yourself, does this reflect how I want to manage my dog? Do you feel this person will listen to you? If not, then again, I'd urge you to consider looking elsewhere before you make any commitment. As professionals, it is also important not to be offended if clients ask you this. We need to remember how stressed they are and not take offence. They're trying to make a very important decision and put their trust in a stranger about this. We hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you want to make sure you don't miss out on the next episode, don't forget to follow us on whatever platform you use for your podcasts.
We'd also really appreciate you giving us a thumbs up rating and sharing details with others who you think might be interested.
If you are listening on YouTube, you can also leave comments and we'd love to see your thoughts and suggestions on the episode. You can even go over to YouTube at www.youtube.com/@whatmakesyouklick2323/podcasts and leave a comment on the show, even if you have listened using a different platform. Alternatively, you can leave a message for us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/dsmpod.
And if you think it might be useful to others, don't forget to share the details with them.
Finally, if you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this episode, please remember you're not alone and professional help is available. In the UK, we recommend you consult with a certificated clinical animal behaviourist, and you can find a list of these at www.ccab.uk. You can also find further details of the Lincoln Animal Behaviour Clinic at www.animalbehaviourclinic.lincoln.ac.uk. That's Animal Behaviour Clinic, all one word, .lincoln.ac.uk. In the notes linked to the show, we provide further contact details, including to international groups.
This has been an independent Million Mills production, and so the views expressed by us are our own and not those of the University of Lincoln. Editing was done by Thomas Mills and original music provided by Henry Eady. Thank you for listening, and all the best till next time.